And now from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection, brought to you by Rio Tinto Alcan.
Welcome back. Today we are talking with the Ending Violence Association's Morgen Baldwin, and we're discussing violence against women in particular today, and the role that EVA has on that. We were talking a little bit about types of abuse before in the earlier segment, and I wanted to ask you more on what emotional abuse is and what that actually means when somebody is going through that.
Yeah, it's a really important question and something that's really important for people to be aware of. I think a lot of people have the definition of, or the kind of boundary of, if anybody ever hit me, I'd be out of there. And so what gets missed is a lot of emotional abuse, which is put downs and isolation and name calling and those kinds of things that really have a devastating effect on somebody's self-esteem and also do serve the intended goal, which is to control that person and to keep them in the relationship.
Is the abuse always bad? There must be different levels, but for a victim to evaluate if this is bad enough to seek help or to realize that they're being abused, is there a scale that they can follow, or is there anything they can do to know?
I think it's a good question because what survivors of domestic violence talk about is that it's often the emotional abuse that's the hardest to recover from, that, you know, bruises heal, and not to minimize the serious nature of physical domestic violence and the injuries that can occur and the homicides that have been happening for many years and really bad this year in British Columbia. But a lot of survivors of domestic violence do say that it's the put downs and the isolation, the loss of their support networks, and that really gets internalized, and it takes years to recover from that. So it's all really important, and I think one of the most important things is to reach out for help sooner than you think you might need it, and to not worry about, you know, I'm going to be a bother, I shouldn't be accessing services because there's other women who need it more. It's really important to know that that's what, you know, the community-based victim assistance program at Kasan Society, for example, that's exactly what it's there for, is for you to be able to talk about what's going on in your relationship and how that's impacting you, and really look at, are you safe, even emotionally, are you safe? And if not, what can be done to support you to get safer in your relationship, and particularly if you're thinking about ending the relationship.
With that too, what are some of the services that EVA does have to offer here in this community?
Well, we are a provincial nonprofit, so we provide supports to the local organizations. So we don't provide direct services in Terrace, but we would support the community-based victim services program at Kasan Society, as well as the Stopping the Violence counseling program and outreach programs. We also have a program called Community Coordination for Women's Safety that's about improving cross-sector coordination. And so one of the groups that we've supported in Terrace is the high-risk domestic violence team, which brings together Kasan Society's community-based victim services, as well as the police and corrections and Ministry for Children and Family Development, and just brings those players together to look at individual cases that are seen to be a high risk for serious physical harm or death, and look at what can the services do to increase the effectiveness of what they're doing, and how can they support the victim to increase her own safety, and what can be done to support the offender to stop his use of violence in the relationship and to be accountable for that. When
you do live in a community the size of Terrace, and here in the north there's lots of smaller communities, and you're in an abusive situation, do you find that maybe the victims are having more trouble seeking that help because it is a small town and everybody may think the abuser is a nice person?
That can happen for sure. There's lots of barriers to seeking support. Most often, as I mentioned earlier, the definition of violence having to be, being hit stops people from accessing services if they're not actually being physically harmed. A lot of concerns, like you say, about confidentiality, knowing that somebody who works there is also connected perhaps through your children, not wanting to have your partner who is abusive to you known in the community. They might be somebody who has an important position in the community or not, but most often people who are in abusive relationships want their partner to heal. They don't want them to be kind of publicly humiliated. So there's a lot of barriers to accessing support, and a lot of people do need to know that there are confidentiality policies and that they can phone and find out about what the confidentiality policy is. If they have a concern about going to, for example, Kasan Society, they could always phone and make an appointment for the outreach worker to meet them somewhere off-site if their concern relates to going to the building. So there are a lot of barriers for people in accessing help, but there's a lot of ways around that and a lot of confidentiality policies that might help, or just kind of creative ways of seeking out support. There is a 1-800 number, 1-800-563-0808, which is Victim Link, and so that's for people who absolutely aren't going to access local services, or maybe they don't know what the local services are. They can call this 1-800 number and talk to trained victim services workers who can help them and also refer them to local services.
Well, thank you, Morgan, and stay with us. After the break, we're going to talk more on what services are out there for men.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages.